Hello everyone, this is AlezierChess here to help you to realize your potential. And today we're going to be studying Wolfgang Uhlmann versus Heinz Liebert. Now some backstory on the players and on this game. This game was played in the East German Championship of 1976, which was won by Wolfgang Uhlmann, but I'm not going to spoil the result of the game and tell you who won. Now, Wolfgang Uhlmann was a FIDE-rated grandmaster, rated 2570 at his peak. He was also a World Chess Championship candidate, and he also won the East German Championship many times in his career. And Heinz Liebert is a Polish international master, and he also played for East Germany in the Olympiad a few times. So let's get into the game. Uhlmann opens with c4, the English opening. Liebert responds with knight to f6. We have knight c3 and d5, angling for a sort of reversed Grunfeld setup. C takes d5, knight takes, and g3. Here black plays the best move, c5, gripping the d4 square so that white can't play d4 without it being captured. Bishop to g2, and knight c7, as the knight on d5 is attacked twice by the knight on c3 and the bishop on g2. So after knight c7, we have knight to f3, developing a piece and getting closer to castle and kingside, and knight to c6, developing a queenside piece and controlling the center dark squares e5 and d4. Here we have queen to a4, and here black could have played bishop to d7, and white could have responded with queen to h4, which is an idea in these types of positions. But here, our good friend the engine recommends, instead of playing g6, that we play pawn to e5, taking a full share in the center. And if white were to trade queens, we take back with the rook. And here black is slightly better, as he has more development and more space in the center. So in the game though, queen to d7 was played, and white responded with castling, and black played pawn to g6. Here, pawn to e5 is possible to take a full share in the center, and if white plays e3, we could respond with bishop to e7 here, preparing castling, and black is okay. But if we were to play e6 here, trying to control the d5 square and bring the bishop out, then we would be met with rook to d1, threatening to blow open the center with pawn to d4. And if we play e5 now, we've lost the tempo. White can play e3, and after bishop to e7, pawn to d4, e takes d, knight takes, queen takes queen check, bishop takes, knight takes, pawn takes, and rook takes. Even though this is even material, because of white's leading development and pressure on the position, white has a winning edge here according to Stockfish. It's +2. A sample line goes bishop c6, takes, pawn takes, and now you have an isolated pawn on an open foul. Rook c4, and if king to d7, in order to protect the pawn, we have bishop to e3, which covers the square c5 in front of the pawn. And here, white is gearing up for rook to d1, and then snapping the c6 pawn off the board. Also, if knight to e6, bishop to e3, we don't even take the pawn just yet. If c5, we have knight to d5, hitting the bishop and preventing castling because the bishop would hang with check. We're also eyeballing the c7 square in case the knight on e6 moves. Here, if bishop to d6 is a sample, rook to d1, castles, and knight to f6 check leads to a better endgame for white after pawn takes and rook takes due to the black shattered and isolated pawns. So here, it's also possible to play pawn to f6 in order to get ready to play e5. But here, Liebert elected to play pawn to g6 to fianchetto the dark squared bishop. So now we have queen to c4, hitting the pawn on c5, and eyeballing the f7 square. So we have pawn to b6 in order to protect the pawn on c5. Our good friend Stockfish prefers knight to e6 in this position though, which kills two birds with one stone. It blocks the queen's line of sight to f7. It defends the pawn on c5, and it also stops any future knight to g5 maneuvers. But here after b6, white plays pawn to b4, which is a pawn sacrifice in the name of opening up lines against black's position. So if knight takes b4 was played, knight to g5, eyeballing f7 with the queen and the knight, threatening queen takes, eyeballing the rook in the corner with the bishop on g2. It's not very pleasant for black. So here, black plays bishop to g7, developing and preparing the castle. And here, after pawn takes pawn, can you find black's next move? That's right, guys. The move is pawn to b5, shutting down white trying to open up lines on the queen side and gaining a tempo on the queen. Now, if knight takes pawn, you have knight takes, queen takes, and you drop the rook in the corner. And therefore, queen to b3 was played. It would have been better, though, to play queen to e4 and still have ideas of knight to g5 in the air and hitting the knight on c6 twice, so that if b4, hitting the knight and taking advantage of the pin from the dark squared bishop on the rook, knight to g5, pawn to h6, hitting the knight. If queen takes knight, we would have pawn takes, and if queen takes queen, check. King takes, bishop takes rook, and here you have to take the bishop. If you play pawn takes knight, trying to be greedy, because, okay, the bishop is hanging, and d2 is hanging, and the rook is going to be attacked, it actually backfires after bishop to e4, c takes d, bishop takes rook, pawn to c6 check, and then after king to e6, rook takes back, and here white's passed pawn should ensure him the victory, even though he has to play a little bit accurately here. So instead of queen e4 though, queen to b3 was played, and now we have b4. Again, trying to kick the knight away so we can steal the rook in the corner. Here, Uhlmann responds with knight to g5, so that if pawn takes the knight, we have queen takes on f7 check, king d8, and queen takes bishop. The rook would be hit, and there's no way to properly defend it because queen to d4 runs into knight f7 check, followed by taking the rook. And if rook to e8, we have a very nice smothered mate in the center of the board. So here, after knight to g5, black castles, and now white played bishop takes knight. Bishop takes knight here is not a very good move. The motivation is understood though. It's to gain a tempo on the queen, threaten to play queen takes b4 because we removed the defender, the c6 knight, defending the pawn on b4 that is, and trying to get out of this nasty pin on the A1 to H8 diagonal. However, it would have been better to play queen to A4, hitting this knight twice, and after bishop to B7, rook to B1, getting out of the pin, so that if pawn takes this knight on C3, rook takes the bishop on B7, and here black should keep the pawn defended with pawn to A5. And now, if pawn to D4, bishop takes pawn, and here rook to D1 runs into queen F5. And now the knight on C3 is hanging, F2 is under fire, and there's pressure on the knight on G5. So here after knight CE4, defending F2 and saving the knight on C3, we would have H6, and black is slightly better here. Actually, a little bit more than slightly better. It's 0.8. Yes, so here, after castles, bishop takes knight, queen takes b4. We have rook to b8. Now, rook to b8, the rook is undefended, so what's going on here? Well, the motivation is that after queen takes rook, bishop to b7 just threatens mate on g2 or h1. And here, the queen could take the rook, but it's going to be very difficult to try to block out black on the light squares. So white could attempt to sacrifice the queen for 2 pieces here, but here black is just completely winning. It's already 1.5. So here, after rook b8, white moves the queen to f4, which puts a little pressure on the knight and keeps an eye on the f7 square. Now we have bishop to b7, launching an attack down this light diagonal. This is why it wasn't a good idea in this position to give up the light squared bishop. And in your own games, make sure to keep in mind that if you give up the fianchetto bishop, you're going to have weaknesses on that color complex. So you're going to make sure, if you do have to give it up, that you can keep the complex guarded. And if you can't keep it guarded, then you really need to keep the bishop and not trade it off, unless you're trading it off for its counterpart. So the bishop on g2 would have been happy to trade for the one that was on c8 that went to b7, but trading for the knight was not a good idea. Now these squares are very difficult to defend. So here, knight to f3 was played. The knight did its job on g5. Now it comes back. Its job being it pressured f7. It opened up the white bishop, which is now gone. Now this knight has to return. And here, knight to e6 was played, gaining a tempo on the queen. Now, the queen goes back to e3, trying to keep an eye on all of these squares on the third rank, in particular the f3 square. But here we have bishop to d4, exclam. Why is this move an exclamation? You can't play knight takes bishop due to one of 2 mates, either on g2 or h1. But here, the queen can't take either because the knight is defending it. So here, if queen to d3, trying to maintain the third rank, knight to g5 hits the knight on f3 for a third time. And now if, say, queen takes bishop, knight takes queen, knight takes knight, pawn takes, queen takes f3, and this diagonal is indefensible. Mate will happen in a few moves after c6, bishop takes, knight to d5, bishop takes knight, and the queen has to take to stop mate, and the game is over. You're up a queen for a bishop. So here, white played the best move in the situation, which is queen h6, and now bishop to a8 was played. This move is very, very, very good because it allows for black to gain a tempo when rook to b1 is played. And why is rook b1 played? Because you need to get out of that pin against your knight on c3, and you're running out of moves here with white. Moving the center pawns, especially the e pawn, creates too many weaknesses on the light squares. The knight on c3 is going to be captured in order to further exploit those weaknesses with the e-pawn if it ever moves. So you can't play something like e4 to block the diagonal. You can't move the d-pawn at the moment because the knight would simply hang, and then the rook in the corner would also hang. So rook to b1 is played to get rid of these problem pieces. And after rook takes, gaining the tempo, knight takes. Here we have queen to e4, which hits the knight on b1 and the e2 pawn. So here Uhlmann plays knight to c3, and after bishop takes knight, removing the defender of the pawn on e2, pawn takes. Now the c-pawns are doubled, but the c-pawns are immaterial at the moment anyway. Like, the best that could be done would be if you could actually get rid of this c-pawn off the board to open up the dark squared bishop to at least feign a counterplay on the g7 square, but even that'll be too late after queen takes the pawn and the knight on f3 is forced to move, and then the queen will re-enter the diagonal by going to e4 more than likely. Here queen takes e2, the knight is hit, knight to h4 doesn't work due to rook to d8, threatening rook d1, and if rook to d1 is played, say white makes a nothing move, rook d1, then rook takes and queen takes is mate. And if you do nothing, let's say you try to run, you can't even run and give up material because this is going to be mate anyway. So here, after knight to h4, rook d8, queen to e3 could be tried, but now knight to g5 will end the game, because if queen takes queen, then knight to h3 is mate with the bishop and the knight, guys. And here, if queen takes knight, we have rook to d1 rearing its head again, and that's game over. So in the game, knight to d2 was tried, and that ran into rook to d8 again, threatening to exchange sacrifice for the knight. So this way we can play queen f3. Very important, queen f3, and not queen to e4. For example, if a4, rook takes knight, bishop takes, queen to e4 would allow for f3. So always be sure to watch for your opponent's potential defensive measures. So instead, queen to f3 locks the square, so this way white cannot escape the mate that's about to come on g2 or h1. Here, after knight d2, queen e3 was tried in order to get rid of the queens by means of a trade. Of course, we're not going to allow for that though. We have rook takes knight. And now if queen takes rook, then we have queen to f3 again. And if queen takes queen, we have rook takes queen with an easily winning piece up endgame. So here, bishop takes rook was played, and therefore Uhlmann must have overlooked the next move, knight to g5, or he just simply allowed it because of its beauty. Here, queen takes queen, there's no way out, so queen takes queen, knight to h3, checkmate. And again, if queen takes knight, queen f3, and there's no escape. Here, you also can't play pawn to f3 in this particular variation because the knight has already reached g5. So knight to h3, check forces the king to the corner, and now we have queen takes rook, check and mate. So guys, what do you think of this game? I thought that this game was very, very pretty, and I thought that it's very unusual. It's the only game that I've seen like this where white doesn't move his center pawns, and then he gets checkmated with a bishop and a knight in a lot of the variations. I thought it was very unique for that, so I thought I would bring it to you guys' attention. I got it from this book, which is in German, and I don't speak German. However, I learned to read it a little bit, so it's where I could read German chess books, since they have a lot of interesting and hard to find games in them. This book is filled with a lot of tactical masterpieces, in my opinion, and reading the German notation is pretty easy. Right? And if I need to translate any of the notes, well, there's Google Translate. There's also ChatGPT now. And I used to also have a German-English dictionary. So that helped about 2 years ago when I found this book. So thank you guys for watching. And I hope that you guys enjoyed the game. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have a great day.